Hey class, this is Professor Bankert. I'm going to talk about your research paper in philosophy of science, try to get some helpful feedback. The written instructions are on Canvas. This video is on Canvas. At the end, if you still have any lingering questions, if you're not quite clear about what I want, please let me know. There's nothing worse than being a student and not being clear about what the professor expects. So I'm going to walk through some of this. I'm going to share my screen here. So here are the instructions. A couple things. It says 10 pages in length. That is an approximate. I don't look at length. I don't grade based on length. It's just an approximate. Students do all kinds of weird things to get paper the right length. You know, they put Courier New, they extend the margins, they, they'll put their name, the date, the professor, all kinds of information at the beginning, and then they start the paper way down at the bottom on page 1. Don't do any of that stuff. It's tacky. It just puts me in a bad mood. So better just to write a good paper, whatever length it happens to be, right? But you know at least what I'm looking for. On the instructions, you have a list of potential topics. You don't have to write on any of these. These are very broad. So this would not be a good thesis, but these are topics that you might choose from, and then if you select one of the topics here, you can make it more specific by getting a very particular thesis inside of them. So one of the topics might be cosmology, origins of the universe, but that's too broad. You'd have to talk about, okay, I'm going to focus on the Big Bang, I'm going to focus on something very specific or concrete within that. I encourage you to talk to me about your topic. I'll try to help you. If you want to do something that's not one of these topics here or something that we haven't covered in class, as long as it's related to philosophy of science, you're good to go. Again, I would talk to you, though, just to be sure. We can work on that. So take a look. I'd be thinking about this early. Don't wait till the last minute, right? This is a research paper, and I really want to see two things that come from it, right? One is, can you really accurately, really articulately describe the view of someone else? So you might look at Karl Popper and his view of science as a philosopher, and you're going to spend half the paper, 40%, 50% of the paper, just telling me about Karl Popper, giving me short quotes, unpacking his views, right? Then the other half is your critical assessment. Where is he strong? Why? Where is he weak? Why? I want to hear you make an argument. That could take up 40 or 50%. So half description, half argument. You need to use 5 outside sources at least. You can use more than that, but you need to use at least 5 things that we have not read in class as outside sources. When you cite them, I don't care if it's MLA, APA, Chicago, just make sure it's consistent. Choose a professional style of citation, then consistently use that throughout the paper, okay? The first paragraph is vital. It's the most important paragraph of the whole paper for me. It should function like an abstract. So this is not creative writing, right? This is philosophy. I want you to get right to the point. In this paper, I intend to argue X. Then I want 3 or 4 sentences that follow that clear thesis that say, I'm going to make this argument by looking at this philosopher, this data, these observations, this scientist. So that after one paragraph, I know what you plan to argue, your thesis, and then I also know how you plan to make the argument, your argument strategy, all in one paragraph. So work on that. If your first paragraph is bad, there's a good chance your paper will be bad. Bad first paragraphs will rarely turn into good papers. So that's important. Don't start it off on the wrong foot. Some mistakes that students make. Students often will spend 80 or 90% describing the views of others, and then they'll set their entire argument onto 1 or 2 pages. Don't do that. The main portion of your grade, the biggest part of your grade is strength of your argument. If you don't really make an argument, if you mostly describe and give a really short abbreviated argument, your grade will suffer immensely. So be sure that 40 or 50% of the paper is your own argument, your own voice, your own assessment. The second thing that students do that's a real problem is they give me too many arguments. They give me 5 or 6 or 7 arguments that are each 1 paragraph long. It's like a shotgun blast with a bunch of BBs. But none of those arguments are any good because they only have one paragraph of depth. I would rather you narrow the scope like a laser beam, not a shotgun blast, narrow it on one or two really good arguments, and give each of those 3 or 4 pages worth of depth, right? Spend more time articulating your 1 or 2 arguments, giving examples, giving data and support. So make sure you spend 50% of the time arguing, and make sure that you narrow the scope to 1 or 2 really good arguments. If you do that, you create a good intro. You have a clear, focused topic, not too broad, focused topic. You spend 50% unpacking the views of others and really articulating the situation of the view well, and then you present your argument. You're going to do well on the paper. So I hope this is helpful to you. I want to look briefly at the rubric, what you'll be graded on. So these are the categories you'll be graded on. The rubric is on Canvas. Under assignments, you can see what each of these gets assigned in terms of points. So how many points is the introduction worth? That's on Canvas under assignments. How much is organization worth and whatnot. The introduction is your first paragraph. You can see the description for excellent, good, adequate, inadequate. So you sort of know what I'm looking for. So we grade on organization. How well does the paper flow? How well is it structured? Do you give enough time to description? Do you give enough time to arguments? All of those things. How well do you represent the views of others? Do you avoid the straw man fallacy? Straw man fallacy is when you describe the views of others in a weak way or an overly generalized way, and then you easily knock their view down because you set it up as a straw man, something easy to knock down. You want to make sure you give the best possible formulation to your opponent. Strength of argument, again, this is how well do you make your argument, how much depth and consistency do you give. How well do you cite your sources? Do you do it consistently and reliably throughout the paper? Remember, if you write several paragraphs, you don't cite anything. The assumption is you come up with all this information. If that's not true, then at the end of a paragraph, if that came from a particular book, make sure you cite that with a footnote or endnote. And then finally, grammar and sentence structure. How well is the paper written? How well is the grammar? Make sure it's written at a high level. You see the GE outcome here. You don't have to be concerned. You're not graded on this. This is just for general education. Philosophy of science meets the general education requirements for philosophy. So this is for my purposes predominantly. All right. Well, I hope this helps. If you have any questions at all, if you are confused at all, please let me know, and I'll want to help. So I'll see you guys in class.